Yeah, for those of you who don't know me, I am Bienvenu. As you can see, I gave this presentation at SQL Saturday and back in August. For those of you who don't or aren't familiar with SQL Saturday, it's basically a 8-hour or so session at the business college at LSU, and people talk tech. Lots of presentations just like this one, and actually brings out hundreds of people. It's actually one of the biggest in the SQL Saturday circuit, and there was like 13, 14 different tracks. So even if you're not in the .NET world, if you're in tech, there's probably something of interest to you. So definitely you might want to consider that next year. It's August or late July. Skip that one. I mean, unless you want to go and fill out a presentation or fill out an evaluation. All right, so just a little bit about myself. So I've been programming for about 3 decades now, professionally for 2. I've been in several different industries: government, health, entertainment. I've done a good bit of Microsoft development and open source development, and I'm currently with NetShapers, a boutique internet services firm in Baton Rouge. We're very small, so basically probably you haven't heard of us. We do a lot of mostly word of mouth, networking based work. I am working in PHP and MySQL, so this presentation is open to everyone. I've actually covered some things here that tonight that are good things for pretty much any discipline. I know since we're mostly software people here, I'll keep it focused primarily on software development. But feel free to ask questions at any time. This is a very, we don't have to rush through it. I think it will come out about an hour. Just raise your hand and wait for me to call you. All right, so as you probably noticed from the emails that went out, I've observed 3 rules about documentation. Nobody writes it, nobody reads it. When you need it, it doesn't exist. And so we're going to try to start breaking these rules. And so, how do we do that? How do we start writing it, so that it exists when we need it? Well, like I've said, I've been doing this for quite some time now, and I've basically come to understand that documentation is a habit. Like any other habit, you have to practice it. You have to commit yourself to it. You have to do it consistently. You have to make it a part of your life. In fact, I would even say that documentation needs to be a part of your organization's culture. Because a lot of times what happens is that your organization just doesn't have the system, or you may have the system, you may have a wiki or some issue tracking software, where you're doing some documentation, but you're just not doing it consistently. And so if you get everybody on board, then it's much more likely that your organization is going to start documenting consistently. So in order to get better at documenting, we have to define what documentation is. So when you think of when I say the word documentation, what immediately comes to mind?
Header files.
Okay.
Comments.
Comments.
Architectural diagrams.
Okay. So, as we know as developers that, there's quite a few different things that we do over the course of our work That's not important. Oh, it even says telemarketer.
Oh, nice.
Cool. Get rid of that. All right. So, I'm gonna go over, over all of these things and kind of organize them so that, we can start thinking a little more systematically about what we need to do to improve documentation. All right, so of course, with everything, you got to start at the beginning. So everything we do basically starts with a scope of work. Some sort of formal agreement that specifies what we're going to do for the customer. So, usually that has, of course, it's going to be some software, and we might also be producing training materials, manuals, other stuff that goes with it. Now, our scope of work is also going to indicate when we're going to deliver it. There's going to be some milestones, certainly when we deliver the finished product. We're probably also going to have some maintenance and ongoing development. So this basically, the scope of work, like I said, we're going to put all this stuff into a contract, we're going to sign it, they're going to sign it, it's going to become law. If we don't live up to it, they're going to sue us. This is basically the starting point with our project. Now, once we've figured out what we're doing, we have to figure out how we're going to do it. So we're going to start producing design documents. And so everything that we produce as we design and structure our product is going to become part of our documentation base. So let's look at some of the things that we're doing. So, in a software product, we're usually going to have some sort of data storage. So that's going to require a database. We might be doing some storage on the file system. Basically, we're going to have some sort of physical structure for where we're putting our data. And we're also going to have some logical structure that goes with it, which would be, in a relational database, that'll be tables. It could be, files filled with CSV data or Excel spreadsheets or a NoSQL database. And then, those logical structures are going to have some sort of relationships between them. Okay, so we're going to have, some sequences. Probably the good old flow chart. I mean, we're going to be figuring out what we need to do, to produce the results that we're expecting. So we might have a flow chart, maybe a workflow diagram, maybe even a task list. A lot of times, we just break things down into tasks that we need to do. And again, we're going to want to keep track of these things. We're going to start having some models in there. I'm just going to go real quick, your typical UML kinds of things. If you're doing like an object-oriented design, you'll probably have classes or objects. You might have packages, components, various structures. Again, this is all going to depend on what kind of methodology you're using. We'll also probably generate some behavior models. Again, activity diagram, sequence, use case, state, communication. Again, like various tools. These are UML models. Probably have some of these with your application. And then you're going to be managing all of this. And your project management is going to produce some documentation. Maybe strengths, weaknesses, opportunities and threats. That's what that is. Maybe a Gantt chart or an activity diagram. Charts breaking down how you're going to do the work. So, as you can see, we're already identifying several types of documents that we're going to be producing in the course of developing. And we haven't even written any code yet. This is just the planning and management of our product. Okay. Now, of course, while we are developing the product, we're going to probably be communicating with our client. So everything that we produce as we communicate with our clients is going to be, we're going to want to put that in our documentation base. So of course, you're going to have meetings. You're going to talk about things. You're going to produce notes from those meetings. You'll probably exchange some emails and some text messages. But what if they just pick up the phone and call you? That might happen. They might even just stop by, all of a sudden and say, hey, we have some things that we need to add to it. And what you're going to find is that these communication streams are not always going to stay in one medium. You may be, in an email exchange with somebody, and then all of a sudden you have to pick up the phone and talk to them about it. Well, you're going to probably want to keep a record of that conversation, because that might actually change the course of direction. So basically, you're probably at some point going to have aggregates of information. This is something that you want to start thinking about now, because we're now talking about, large quantities of information that we're saving, that we're generating, and on the assumption that we're going to save, pretty much all, if not, or most of this stuff. At some point we're going to start aggregating it into, aggregating different forms of information. Now, of course, you're going to be also going to be talking amongst yourselves as you develop the project. And so these internal communications are also going to be part of your documentation. So, you might have some task lists, if you're using something like Trello, where you're organizing stuff, or maybe like an Agile or Scrum system. You'll probably generate progress reports. Again, like I said earlier, if you have milestones where you need to report to your client about the progress that you're making, well, you're going to have to produce reports based on that. And even whatever your form of internal communication, be it Slack or Skype or whatever new thing comes along, you may need to save those exchanges of information, because that may be where you discuss something relevant. I adapted Slack at my group several years ago, and I basically have set up a channel for each project that we have. And the good thing about, one of the many good things about Slack is that you sometimes may have to go back a few years and realize, oh yeah, we talked about that some time ago. Oh, it was actually a couple of years ago. And if you're not maxing out that 10,000 message limit, you might actually have some relevant conversations that you might, that you need to go back to. And if you are maxing out that limit, you probably need a way to save that and export it into something a little more manageable. And of course, we get to the good stuff, the code. And code, we tend, on first glance, we tend to think of the documentation aspect of code as being comments. But I would actually argue that well-written code has a lot of documentation embedded in it. So if you have well-written, planned structural elements, they will, it should be largely, to some degree, self-documenting. It should be easy to figure out. And of course, when you have scripts and queries, those are also parts of, those are just as important as your classes and interfaces. So you need to consider those too. So yes, like I said, code has inherent documentation properties. It demonstrates structure and it demonstrates functionality. I will just go over real quick. Block comments. Again, I probably don't have to go into too much detail about what a block comment is. I'm a little more interested here in about how you can start to organize block comments. So this is a sample of a comment from a real project, and again, the significance here is how it's organized. So I have bullet points for these. All right. So, for example, you can start off with a brief description of why the class or method exists. I usually put that up towards the top. For whatever reason, I left it out of this one. I could just put some Ipsum text in there. Certainly could indicate an author and a version or creation date. I know sometimes that, and we're going to get to we're going to get to Git and source control in a moment. I do think that it's a good idea, even with source control, to indicate an author or authors and put a date on it, because at least it's right there. It's easy to see, and sometimes information is missing from source control. For a class, you can indicate the interfaces that you're implementing, the classes that it extends, properties and methods. For methods, you can indicate parameters, return types, and exceptions. Block comments are also a great place. So just put free-form text, like any usage notes, links to external information. Actually, I'm finding, as I mentioned to some of y'all earlier, that I've started working with Vue, V-U-E, the JavaScript framework, and a lot of times I'm doing the code that I'm developing with it. I just take a URL for something, and just drop the URL in there. And I highly recommend. It's a very easy way to add a cross-referencing to your code. You certainly want to make note of, like I said, links to external information. Okay. And then, of course, we have inline comments. So certainly, one thing you can do is, note the type that your function returns. And again, this is actually for a language like PHP that has very weak typing. This is a pretty good habit to get into, because you're not always going to be able to tell just by the function that you're calling what it's going to return. And so sometimes it might be good to have a little note right there that says, hey, this returns a string or an object. Excuse me. You should also make note of exceptions that could be thrown. I would say this is actually very important to make a note, at any point in the code where an exception could be thrown out of something you're calling, because you're going to have to handle it. I mean, very few exceptions you're going to want to percolate all the way up to to the top of the application. And actually, I'm dealing with some situations right now where I'm working with some code that throws exceptions very deep within if you don't do certain things. And it's like I've had to actually spend a couple of days worth of time aggregated trying to figure out what these, things are done, because there's just no concrete, documentation of these exceptions. I'm having to go hunt down, why these things are happening. You definitely want to, that's definitely a good thing to do. And of course, any clarifications or explanations. Basically, if you're doing anything weird, you should make a note about it. If there's something that's just unusual, it's not expected, just, make a note of it. Hacks, workarounds, unexpected return types. As I said earlier, if let's say that you have a function that you're expecting to return an object. Well, what if it returns a string instead? Then, it might be a good idea to have a little note in there saying, hey, this is returning, if you just put return string, then you're going to know that this function that you might assume would return an object could return a string, or if in some cases it returns an object, in other cases it returns a string. What are you getting back? And of course, any side effects. Side effects can be really nasty and cause you problems that can take a lot of time to resolve. If you wrote it 6 months ago, it might as well have been written by someone else.
Did you write this 6 months ago?
No, I did not. I'm pretty sure that someone, I have no idea who actually said this. It might have been me, but I didn't bother to look it up. But yeah, if you're working on several different projects, or even if you're working on one project that's pretty big, you're probably not going to be keeping track of, our minds just go through so much information, and a lot of information that goes through it, we offload it. So, I found sometimes situations where if I'm working on something and, and the boss drops something on my desk and says, hey, this is some paid work, let's go ahead and take care of it now, I could go back to it the next day and have to just completely get myself back in the mindset of, of where I was. So certainly, don't think that you're going to remember everything that you did, because you're not. And now, of course, for the good old code control. You are using code control in management, right? Of course you are. This is 2019. We have tools to, at the very least, we have Git. And this is something you should, that it's just irresponsible to not do it. Well, it turns out actually that we can get some, documentation out of our code control. So start with the commit. So probably don't have to tell everybody this here. Your commit is basically a set of changes to the code, which would be additions and deletions. Now, commits do actually give you a lot of, they have documentation properties. Because basically your commit stream is a history of the changes. What changed, when it changed, who changed it. And sometimes you may have to go back and say, you look at something and you're like, wait a minute, I thought this was different. Did it change? You go look back in the commit history, and yep, you see that it did change. And then we have branches. So, again, a branch being a duplication of an object or a set of objects under control, so that modifications can occur in parallel along multiple branches. And this is actually one that I from personal experience, I know that this is actually something that's been kind of a problem for me because I've never really developed the habits of, of organizing my code into branches. It can be very important to keep new features separate, and also, for bug fixes and hot fixes. Excuse me. Yeah, the set of they show different courses of development in your code. And then we also have automated testing. Now, you might not have thought of automated testing as documentation, but let's think about it for a bit. Automated testing demonstrates that the code works. It demonstrates usage of structural elements. It isolates functional elements from the project. And automated testing also provides an opportunity to demonstrate usage of the code in unusual situations. So if you start thinking of automated testing as, as the first user of your code, you can actually get, embed a lot of useful information in it. For example, all the possible use cases, all the possible exception cases. Can you verify that, what happens if a method is expecting an object and you feed it a string? In your automated testing, you can actually document what happens in that case. All right, so we're working on this project. We're going to ultimately deliver it, but probably we're going to be delivering some documents along with it. So you might have some READMEs that go along with it. Maybe a quick start guide. Maybe a list of frequently asked questions. Maybe some training materials and manuals. These are all very useful documents, not just for the client, but also for you. You get to, you're going to be writing these things, so you're going to be figuring out how to, you're going to be basically documenting how your product works as you're doing these things. And you may also, need some of these things to bring other people into the project. So you definitely want to think about, do a good job on these deliverables. And then after you release, hopefully first of all, anything that you release is going to have some customer support. You're going to be probably going to be training people how to use it. There's going to be support tickets generated as people find either outright bugs or usability issues, things that weren't anticipated in the design. And like I said, of course, bug reports. So you start taking those support tickets and you separate what are bugs and what are things that are just training issues. And so this customer support is going to generate maintenance. And so you're going to have bug fixes and performance updates, and you're going to have issues that go with those. And hopefully you're going to get some further development on the project. Hopefully you're going to sell them this thing and you're going to be able to keep selling them add-ons and support over the years, so it keeps making money for you. And so then further development is of course going to include new features and hopefully some modification of existing features, like maybe some like I said, they're going to figure out all the other things that they can do that would be productive with it. So So we've identified several forms of documentation through the course of our project. And now we need to start, so now we've identified what we're going to do. We need to think about how we're going to start making these things habits. And I'm just going to go through, some basic takeaways here on, some general purpose things. I do want to point out that, in terms of organizing all this stuff, again, what exactly you do is going to depend on the, your organization and the kind of work that you do, and, like I said, the fact that you're going to have to get everybody on board. Well, let's look at some simple things that everybody can do. First off, I highly recommend digitizing all content. I mean, it's kind of hard to put pieces of paper into an electronic filing system. So of course, you want to type up all handwritten notes. I do think, to some extent, paper's never going away. Sometimes it's just better to be sitting in a meeting with a pad of paper and just jot stuff down. But you're going to want to have a digital record of all that. So you want to type those up. As I said earlier, aggregating communication into transcripts. This is going to be particularly important when you have a conversation stream that moves from one medium to another. If you have things like text messages or phone calls that are, outside of an email thread. Scan or take pictures of hand-drawn diagrams. There's, again, even if you just draw something out on a whiteboard. Well, we've all got our, fairly inexpensive devices that have cameras on them. Why not just, if you've drawn something out on a whiteboard, take a picture of it. It's so easy to do, but also the fact that you're getting into the habit of saving information. Because again, the habit has to start with saving information. So you might as well take advantage of the tools that we have to save information easily. Now, once you have diagrams, you should use diagramming tools to make more permanent copies of it. So, always a good idea to sketch it out on paper, if that works best for you, but still a good idea to take that sketch and actually put it into, into some sort of design program and make it pretty, because if you need to change it, it'll be a lot easier to change it and keep track of those changes if it's in a digital form. It's also going to be a lot easier to search for it. Track issues. And again, I have to admit that this is one that, that I'm not always the best at myself, because it's like, okay, you get a bug that comes in, it's like, okay, open up the text editor, oh, it's a couple of lines here, open production, change it there, bam, you're done. Well, that's maybe quick and easy, but you're not building your habit of documenting by doing that, by just letting it come and go. So, use an issue tracker software. Your source control client probably has one integrated already. If you're using GitHub, you have an issue tracker. If you're using GitLab, you have an issue tracker. If your source control product doesn't have one and doesn't integrate well with one, probably consider using a different one. It's just, there's so many options out there, there's little reason to not do it. It's like I said, every feature request, every bug. We have to get into the habit of keeping track of these things, and it's a little extra time, to do, you know, it's like, okay, we'll just fire up the text editor and, you know, open up an FTP or a shell terminal and make a quick change. But, you know, we're not helping ourselves build these good habits of documenting if we're not doing it for every single feature request and bug. And also, if you are using an integrated source control client, odds are they have something in there that lets you make annotations that link between your commits and your issues. Usually what it is if you do hashtag and then the number of the issue, that will make, I know GitHub and GitLab both, you know, will link you to that issue with that number. And so this is a you know, a feature when you start seeing these cross references, you have to refer back and forth between them, you will really start to appreciate it. Write readable code. You know, it may seem kind of trite to say that, but you know, there's a lot of times it's tempting to just pound something out and use a whole bunch of abbreviations and just, you know, just get out there. But you're not helping yourself in terms of documentation if you do that. In fact, I would say a good rule: do unto your fellow developer what you would want your fellow developer to do unto you. You know, if you like having code that's easy to read, then write code that's easy to read. Excuse me. You know, implement coding standards. I mean, there's, you know, again, this is something that, you know, every organization should at least talk about, because, you know, I know I've got my, you know, styles that I prefer, and, you know, I've had, you know, again, I have to admit I'm guilty of, you know, of taking code that was developed with one set of coding standards and just coding right into it with my own standards, and, you know, and then you've got, you know, mess. You know, use software to format code automatically. I mean, again, this is 2019. We don't have to, you know, we don't have to indent and push everything to place and line up all of our, you know, all of our braces ourselves. You know, develop, figure out what kind of tools you have that you could use to format, and then just let the formatter, you know, do that. And see, what you do there is you get in the habit of coding and then running the, you know, the formatter afterwards. Because again, we're talking about habits here. We're talking about things that we can do consistently so that they become habits, so they become automatic. And, you know, and thinking in terms of how we can make software work for us. I mean, we're software developers. You know, why not make software work for us? I mean, that's literally what we're doing for a living. We're making software work for other people. It can work for us too. Annotate your code. Depending on what language you're using, it probably has some sort of annotation feature built in. On the left, we have a sample of code from .NET, and as you can see, they have an annotation standard that's, I mean, it's built right into .NET. PHP doesn't have one that's built in. There's this kind of de facto standard using the at marks. And again, you know, this is something where if there is not one that comes with the language, you could probably figure out something you could do with your comments. And actually, I use a program called PHP CS fixer to fix up and clean up my PHP code, and it uses the annotations of this style here as part of how it, does its work. So again, whatever language you're using, look at what kind of standards, are commonplace for annotating, and then just, make a habit of annotating your code. All right. I think I got the slides. Yes. So like I said, make software work for you. Find tools that work and use them. Kind of a closer here. Again, your specific solution is going to turns out I'm like right at 45 minutes, so we're doing pretty good. I'm just going to show you a little quick knowledge base that I drew up. Again, it's going to depend on what, I can't really propose a general solution for building a knowledge base. I have, however, found this tool called Notion. It's Notion.so, and it's free with paid options, and it's actually a pretty good tool, and it's kind of like a wiki on steroids, in that you can organize information in it by lists or tables of information. So, let's see. Oh, I misspelled it. Interesting. All right. So, so I have this little mock-up of, of a knowledge base, and so, we have, we have various projects that we're managing. We have events on those projects, people associated with our projects, either employees or our vendors or our clients. We have some assets that we're managing, documents associated with various things. So again, this is a very rough mock-up. This is actually a model that I've developed that I'm actually going to try to use, when we land client projects for data management, because it's just this very simple organization. But again, that's one that works well for me. I mean, if you ever, and of course, we're in the business of developing software, so if you want to pay somebody to develop a knowledge management system for you, I'll be glad to give you my card. But like I said, there are plenty of software tools out there. Just do a little bit of research, identify your own needs, have that conversation within your organization about what you need to do more of and how you can do it. Does anybody have any questions? No? All right, well, I'm done. Thank you for coming tonight and for having me to present.
I did want to second your comment that you had about develop a coding standard. At the company that I'm at now, one of the first things that happened when I walked in the door was they said, use the formatting tools for the language and build us a consistent auto formatter. And just the simple act of, when I hit build on my code, the first thing that it always does is it runs the formatter. So it's part of my every single compile, and it's a certain quality of life that just changes the way you look at writing code and formatting code. You don't format anymore because it is formatted.
Yeah.
Same thing for coding standards. You come up with a stricter, maybe not strict, but at least formal coding standard that you stick to. When everybody sticks to it, on the project or on the team or on the company, it's a quality of life. It changes the quality of life of writing that software.
Yeah.
Is the formatter an obfuscator?
No.
So if you had to choose, like, let's say this code is being built at gunpoint, essentially, but you can only choose one type of documentation. What do you think is the most, like, valuable or you know, what do you think is the most valuable form of documentation?
Well, I mean, it's kind of a hard question because, you know, as I identified, you know, over the course of, you know, of development, I mean, from making the sale to delivering the product, you have all these things that you're going to be doing anyway. You know, so someone's holding a gun at your head and said, you can pick only one of these things to do. And you're like, well, you might as well shoot me because I'm not going to be able to develop this product, you know? You know, I would say if you have that problem, choose your clients a little better, you know? Yeah, I mean, it's the fact that it's a process, and you know, you have all these things that you're going to be doing anyway. You know, as a result, or you know, you should be doing as a result of, you know, if you want your product to succeed. It's like I said, it's more of you know, developing habits of doing these things in the first place and doing things consistently. I mean, especially when they're small, you know, small details. Because I think that's where we tend to, you know, if we're just in this mindset of, well, anything that comes along, we're just going to do it and get it done. Okay, well, at some point though, you're going to end up, you know, let's say I've been in a situation where I've fixed something, I've been given a bug, I fixed it, and then come to find out later I caused another bug to manifest in something else. So, you know, that's the kind of situation that you want to avoid outright, you know, for obvious reasons. But if you don't have these habits, you know, these good habits, you know, that's where you're likely to end up in that kind of situation. If you don't, I mean, that's the thing. I've dived right into code that, you know, that other people have written so many times, you know, and, you know, just so often, you know, you don't even, I mean, I am really bad about fixating on whatever my situation is at hand and not really seeing the greater context in which it is. And, you know, especially when you come onto a job and, you know, you're probably not going to read everything that all of your predecessors did. You're going to have a job to do right there. You know, we just don't think about these things. And so really that's where it all has to start, is just thinking about, you know, what more could I be doing, and what, you know, how has not doing these things caused problems for me in the past?
It's funny you say that you fix the problem and cause another bug. I've seen a team actually go back and forth. One person fixes it, it causes a different bug that falls in the other guy's domain. He fixes it back, it causes a problem in the other guy's domain. You know, they cycle that back and
you
forth.
end up with these cycles of changes because you make a change, you break something, and you completely forgot what you did, so you end up changing it back to what it was before.
That's exactly right.
Yeah, I mean, and again, that's kind of why, you know, if you have a situation like that, and even if you're using source control, I mean, when was the last time you sat down and read a commit history? Yeah, I don't think we just don't tend to do that. What you can do is when you make a change in the code itself, you just make a change and said, okay, this was not working. That's why I changed it. Because so if you end up in that situation where you changed it to something that works in one case but doesn't work in another, you go back to that same point. You're like, you think it may need to go back to what it was before, but there you have a note saying, okay, when it did this, this happened. Because odds are your solution is something completely different, and it may actually be outside, something you haven't dealt with before, or, I mean, who in here is guilty of programming by Stack Overflow? I mean, we tend to do that, especially when we're up against, deadlines or fixing bugs in production,
So one thing he said was that it's a culture. Like you make a habit of commenting correctly. So like we have .NET, we have a coding style that if on the project where you have to follow the coding style, or build, you gotta have comments you gotta have comments for all your methods. That's not gonna stop everybody. You can throw whatever you want in the comments for the methods, and people will if you don't have a culture.
Yeah. Well, and I mean, it also, I mean, I use templates that, that put that, that start the block comment for me. And the number of times that I actually write out a complete sentence for, every method that I'd say maybe 10% of the methods that I do. Because a lot of times, it's something that's pretty obvious based on the structure. And I think I would say this though, that at least having the template, the block comment template in there gives you something to build upon. I mean, yes, very few of us are going to take time, are going to be paid to sit there and, and explicitly document every single thing that we do. So this is where you start looking for ways to get it done automatically. For example, if you're starting a method, how about have a tool that starts the block off for you, puts your name, the current date, and also the parameters that you've done. I mean, that's generally, if you have a method, you should, give some indication of what your parameters are, what it's returning, any exceptions that it throws. You'll find, again, when at least having that block there, you're starting from something. And yeah, a lot of times you're not going to fill it out on the spot, but maybe sometime later when you realize, hey, I need to make a note there, you're going to have that template ready and waiting for you. And then over time, it'll just become second nature to drop important stuff into it as you're developing. Or at the very least, if you're making, if you have review passes, this would probably work out a lot better if you're doing like pair programming or team programming, because, where you have to look at something that somebody else wrote on a constant basis. This is, I think, where you could get everybody on board and say, hey, let's all try to do, make these notes, on the things that we write, so that when you hand it off to the other person, you're not getting something that might as well be written in Chinese. You're getting something you can actually understand and keep building upon.
Great. Time for one more question, anybody? Yeah, that's the question. All right. Thank you, Jay.
You're welcome. Thank you for having me.